Hey, it's me, your boy Blue Gets again, and I'll be doing another Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier analysis video. And this time will be on Aromages, Skull Servants, and Karakuris. For context, Aromages are a plant archetype based around gaining life points, and they're kinda synchro based. I say kinda because we only got synchro versions for two of the cards, and I think that there's like two other main deck or even three other main deck Aromages that don't have their extra deck counterparts. Anyways, let's get started. For the pros, we have Master Roll 5. They have good battle protection. They have decent protection against card effects. They can gain advantage. Is fairly good at gaining life and is fairly good at gaining life points. And here's where the issues with this deck come in. It is hard to keep advantage after losing life points because your advantage is based on the amount of life points you have in this deck. So once you get below a certain threshold, it's hard for you to actually get your life points back and gain proper advantage. This deck has little to no recovery because once you lose advantage, you kind of lose. And this deck can't play through too many negates for obvious reasons. But this deck is still pretty good and pretty decent in what it actually does. And if you actually do open up really well and keep your advantage, it's actually very hard for your opponent to actually defeat you. Unless they're playing something really powerful. Which is why I'd say that this deck is actually a tier 3 deck. It's a deck that you can easily bring to locals, and it's a deck that you can easily have fun with. Next, we have Skull Servants. Skull Servants, like Batterymen, they're a very old archetype that I think came out even before GX. Anyways, the archetype relies on their boss monster, King of the Skull Serpent. And the win condition is just to get this card out with a ton of attack points. So let's get right into this. This deck can OTK. This deck does have access to zombie support. It is able to consistently fill the graveyard with Skull Servants. Now for the cons. This deck's playstyle is incredibly linear, so all you have to do essentially is just deal with their King of the Skull Servant. Loses to monster removal and effect negations, which is also another really big debilitating weakness with this deck. Like your opponent could break through Skillet, impermanence it, Lost Wind your boss monster, and yeah, they could basically run over it and then potentially OTK you from there. This deck is incredibly slow because again, in today's Yu-Gi-Oh, you kind of need to finish off your opponent as soon as possible. Plus, it takes a while just for your King of the Skull Servant to gain an adequate amount of attack. So there's that. It needs more. They need more Skull Servant cards. Like they need. I would say they also need a lot more protection, because I think the only form of protection you have in the deck is Lady in White, and that only protects you from being targeted by spells and traps. So needless to say, its protection is incredibly mediocre, and this deck can lose to a single negate. I think what this deck needs is, like I mentioned, more protection. At least that way, like I feel like if they got an adequate amount of protection, this deck would probably move up from tier 4 to like tier 3 easily, or even a little bit above that. But that's probably expecting too much. Which is why I'd say that this deck for right now is a tier 4 deck. It's just like Batterymen, it's a glass cannon archetype. If you don't OTK, you kind of lose. And lastly, we have Karakuri. Karakuri are a machine synchro archetype, and they focus on synchro climbing, using their boss monsters to special summon tuners from the deck. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be Karakuri tuners, but the synchro climb you'd rather summon Karakuri tuners. Anyways, for the pros, we have Master Rule 5, we have good boss monsters, and then we have great spells and traps. Mostly the trap card, the newest trap card that came out. Also, this card got their own premature burial, which also allows them to gain attack points, which is pretty cool. This deck can OTK. Now for the cons. It lacks needed Karakuri monster support since, due to one of the newest support cards, it kind of locks you into Karakuri monsters, and you only have 3 Karakuri extra deck monsters, so that's not all that great. Where if it didn't lock you into those things, you can argue that this deck would probably be moved to tier 2.5. But because of the restriction, it wouldn't really be the best, since none of your Karakuri extract monsters have, any bite to them aside from this new card. And this card is actually your win condition, whereas before Karakuris were, all they did was like to summon tons of synchro monsters. But due to the new support, you're kind of locked out of that, and you're more restricted to this, which normally I would be fine with, but you only have 3 extra deck options for Karakuri. And then, oh yeah, and when I say that this card's the only card in the archetype that has bite, by that I mean it's the only extra deck monster within Karakuri that actually does something aside from special summon a Karakuri from your deck. Because whenever battle positions are switched, this thing can actually banish a card on the field. It doesn't have to be a monster, it could be any card. And this is like leagues better than its previous, like the other 2 Karakuri synchro monsters. And then for the next con is it goes through boss monsters way too fast. The thing with this deck is if you go through your boss monsters, you kind of lose. Which is why next I'll say it's a bit of a glass cannon. But it shouldn't be too much of a problem since, again, like I mentioned, this deck is pretty good. Not to mention you've been given a premature burial, so you can actually bring back some of your Karakuri monsters you use, your Karakuri synchro monsters you use to link climb and hopefully OTK from there. Plus, you can potentially use this card's effect to banish whatever's in your way, so that way you can easily OTK from there. And then lastly, it can't play through more than 1 negate, because this deck is still very frail in that kind of sense. Anyways, if I was to rank this deck, I'd say it's a tier 3 deck. It's a decent deck, and it's a fun deck to actually play. You can bring it to your locals, and you can rack up several wins from there. Anyways, it's me, your boy Blue Gatsuga, and I'm out.